So you've just been diagnosed with some sort of chronic illness, whether that for like me, it's Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease, and then an ultra rare disease, genetic disease called hypophosphatasia. What's next? So what happens? It's a whirlwind of information that's typically thrown our way, So obviously, to get to a diagnosis, there is typically a lot of tests involved, whether that's blood work, x-rays, like GI studies, physical exams. Then you have, for me, with the genetic disease, there's a genetic testing component to it, and you often have to see several different physicians to run these different tests. So, for me, for my genetics, initially saw my primary care, then was referred out to an endocrinologist, was then referred out to a medical geneticist to run that lab, get the testing done. And then for the inflammatory bowel disease diagnosis, I had tons of GI studies, I had colonoscopies, I had EGDs where they go down your throat, I had a pill cam study, CTs, MRIs, all kinds of stuff, obviously blood work. So being diagnosed with any kind of chronic illness and the initial shock of that is can be pretty traumatic, just because you've been through a lot already in terms of being sick, not knowing what is wrong, and then going through the gauntlet of getting a medical diagnosis and, of what is going on. And then coming to terms with that diagnosis. When you're diagnosed with something, especially something that has no cure, something that is a chronic illness, there is a heavy weight that is, sometimes it feels like there's this burden and weight that's lifted off your chest because you've had sometimes years of symptoms and been sick and nobody knows what's wrong with you, and then to finally have a confirmed diagnosis. The truth is that oftentimes when it takes so long to get a diagnosis, especially for me, I felt like maybe it was in my head, maybe I was a little bit crazy. I don't like to use that term, but that's how I felt, and that's just the truth of it. So it's very hard. There is, again, it feels like a diagnosis. There's this initial weight that's lifted off, and then all of a sudden you have to come to terms with, how is this going to change my life? What kind of treatment is there? There is no cure, which means, again, it's chronic. You have to live with it the rest of your life. How is this going to impact my day-to-day? What's it going to do to my schedule? How much money is it going to cost? What is the long-term prognosis and outlook? There are all these questions that just kind of come up, and there's a lot of information that gets thrown at you. You're oftentimes handed a packet of something like this. I got this when I was diagnosed with hypophosphatasia. I've had a couple different ones since, but it has all this information in it, all these brochures and journals and just all kinds of stuff. That's just for one little thing. So they literally throw a bunch of stuff at you, just to kind of get you educated on it. But it's overwhelming, to say the least. It's challenging.